Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everybody around the world. My name is Olin Monteiro. I'm the PWAG coordinator for Indonesia. I welcome you to our second panel of the PWAG Asia Feminism Forum. Today, we just had our first panel this afternoon at 2 p.m. in Jakarta time and 3 p.m. in Hong Kong time on the indigenous women. It was very inspiring and very encouraging for us to listen to all the indigenous women from all over Asia. And we do hope that today we will have a very interesting panel of the youth activists and to hear and to learn from the youth movement all over Asia. So we will start this session because we are very lucky to have a very talented young musician. Her name is Sandrayati Fay. So Sandrayati is a performer and also singer-songwriter, and also she is an activist. So she is a Filipino Irish American heritage, but she's born in Java in Indonesia and also in Bali. And she's also an environmental and human rights family activist, so an activist from her family. So this is also helped her inspire on her musical journey. And she has been performing in a lot of festivals related to environment and also climate issues. And she has launched a few albums or EPs from 2015 until now. She just recently launched a new single this week. So I encourage you to go to Spotify and follow her at Sandrayati Fay. And also she will be preparing her new album this year, and maybe she will tell you more about it later. So I'll give to Sandrayati to present your music and to grace us, to open us for this session tonight. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Olin. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. I'm coming to you from Iceland, all the way in the north of the world is where I'm living at the moment. But yes, as Olin said, I was born in Indonesia and half Filipino and American. And I'm going to start my first song as a song that I wrote for my mother. And she, as Olin was saying, is also an activist, environmental activist, and works with indigenous people's rights. And well, this is a song for mother. So she was one of the women who raised me, and also Mbawiji in Java was one of the women who raised me. And we all know how women hold the world in our communities in such a powerful way. And this song is in Indonesian, and it's talking about how I wouldn't have grown without the hands of my mother. So it's about the honoring of the growth of the women in my life. And so this is for you as you gather today, honoring each other and discussing these incredible things. Kita masih bersama walaupun jauh, sudah lama kita bertemu, tapi hatiku mengerti cuma satu dunia. Jangan lupa laguku yang cuma kau tahu. Kau pegang hatiku sambil tumbuh, sambil tumbuh. kasih kembali cuma jangan lupa lakuku yang cuma kau tahu, kau pegang hatiku sambil tumbuh, sambil tumbuh. Thank you so much. Again, it is quite an honor to be here. I have one more song for you to begin this session. And this one is in English, and it's classic folk song from America. And I was recently learning it, actually. I grew up kind of knowing the song, but it feels very relevant to so many of our situations in a time like this. And I'm going to leave you with this song. I'll join the session and listen to the discussion as long as I can as well today. But this song is called We Shall Overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And we are not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And we are not Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. One more. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Ooh, deep in my heart, I do believe we are overcoming now.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for the wonderful opening.
And the sun is rising now in Iceland.
Yeah, good morning in Iceland. It's wonderful. We can see the sun is glowing in your face now, I think. It's wonderful. Thank you very much. And also, thank you very much for the rendition of We Shall Overcome, which we always use for the feminist movement all over the world. In many cases of protests and everything, we usually sing that song. And it's very inspiring, and it's also very encouraging us to continue with the discussion. So I'll introduce to you, and welcome for everybody who just joined here, and also welcome for everybody live streaming within the China network that is now streaming. Welcome and thank you for joining our session. So today we will have Karantanada. She is the director of Gaston C. Ortigas Peace Institute in Philippines, which is a service-based and resource center for peace and conflict resolution in the Philippines that supports citizen participation in peace process. Karen has been involved in social movements since quite a long time, maybe when I was born. So she's like basically my big sister, and she's the founding conveners of the Coalition for Peace. She's also a member of the preparatory committee that coordinated the draft of Philippine National Action Plan for UNSC Resolution 1325. Karen, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And my role is really to introduce other people too. So yes, good afternoon, good evening, and maybe good morning. I'm pleased now very happy to introduce one of our co-coordinators for the Southeast Asia Peace Women across the globe. She's Supawadee Petrat, or we call her Kratae. She's the director of the Thai Volunteer Service Foundation and an advisor on gender-specific issues in the Women Workers Unity. She had been also the program coordinator for the Committee of Asian Women, where she was involved in improving the position of women in the labor force. Her special expertise is on the problems facing women workers in Asia, and also working with young people in the Mekong countries. So we call now on Kratae, who will give a welcome message for this session.
Hi, thanks, Karen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all friends in every corner of the world. And I'm very happy to be here today. And as you know that the crisis of democracy happened in many countries, not only in Asia like Thailand, Philippines, Myanmar, or Hong Kong, but many countries, many other countries in the world. And at the same time, we also witness that the young people play very active role to restore or to fight for the democracies. Some of them were arrested. Some of them cannot live in their home countries. And some of them still keep on fighting with the big hope that one day they can make it. And the forums today and the workshop on the mapping and exchange of feminism and democracy in Asia. I think the main goal that to map and learn about the young people situations in several countries and how they organize their movement in these crisis situations and democracies change. And on behalf of PWAGs, I would like to welcome all speakers, moderators, and participants from over the world to attend this workshop. We will take 2 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, our sister Kratae. And so now I would like to introduce the one who will be our moderator for this whole session. She is Rachel Arini Judistari with East Asia, and she's the East Asia and ASEAN manager for the Forum Asia, also known as the Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development. Before this, she had also worked with the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights as program manager. And she had also worked with the Asia Pacific Research and Resource Center for Women, or ARO. She had been coordinating advocacy and partnership in Southeast Asia. Because of her many contributions in the region, she had been appointed to FRIDA, the Young Feminist Fund Advisor, also to the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, and to the TB and Malaria Board member, and as ARO board member. And she has joined the Indonesian government delegation in the United Nations Commission on Population and Development during its 45th and 47th session. So may we have now Rachel, who will be our moderator for this whole session.
Thank you so much, Karen. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all the participants who join us online. This is the second panel of the PWAG Feminist Festival with the title on Youth Exchange on Democracy and Feminism. I'm really honored to be part of this very important panel with 4 other speakers. In this panel, we have Shatakshi Gawade from India, who is an environmental communicator based in Pune. She is an independent journalist and also worked with different environmental organizations for environment conservation and protections by using communications tools. She is currently with Ecological Society Pune and GT Fitnati. We also have Rafaela David, who is currently the Executive Director of the Center for Youth Advocacy and Networking, a youth-led, youth-serving non-governmental organizations who are committed to working for communities where young people are empowered to effect societal change. And as Executive Director of CYAN, she also has led training programs for young progressive politicians, farmers, campus journalists, etc. Our third speaker is from Thailand, who is currently having a very interesting progress. And we have Kornkanok Khumta, or we can call her Pap. Pap is a feminist and political activist from Women for Freedom and Democracy. She is a human rights defender from Frontline who pushed the agenda of gender justice to the pro-democratic movement. Last but not least, my fellow friends from Indonesia, Anindya Restuviani, or Fifi, is an Indonesian feminist activist who advocates for diverse feminist issues in Indonesia, with emphasis on sexual and reproductive rights and gender-based violence. Currently, she is the program director of Jakarta Feminist Association, where she helps to provide safe space for women in Jakarta so that they can discuss the gender difficulties that they face. She is also currently served as the co-director of Holabek Jakarta, a movement that seeks to end harassment in public spaces. So I'm very excited that we have like our vibrant and fiery young feminists in the panel today, because we will discuss a very important issues on democracy and how the youth, especially youth of feminist activists, are contributes to the democracy movement. And before we start, we all know that the Asia region, as well as other region in the world, has affected by COVID-19 pandemic. It creates a genuine health emergency. However, governments also take extraordinary and unprecedented measures in an effort to curb its lethal progress. And to some extent, some of the government also use the pandemic as an excuse to clamp down on peaceful political and social dissent, and to deepen discriminations and violence against women and other vulnerable groups. So this increasing authoritarianism really affecting the quality of our democracy. And to add, the lockdown also contributes to the increased sexual gender-based violence, as well as like access for services that affecting our journey towards achieving gender equality. So against the backdrop, I'm actually really keen to ask the panelists the first questions, which is, how is democracy in Asia, especially your country, situations today? And first off, I would like to give the floor to Shatakshi to inform us about what's happening in India, especially in regards to the social movement and the environmental movement. Shatakshi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be in this very interesting and very diverse panel from so many different places. So I'll jump right in and answer Rachel's question that since India's independence in 1947, there has been a very strong involvement of the public and of the youth in many different social movements. To talk about the most recent past, since the last, say, 6 or 8 years, the social issues, the fight over social issues has become louder and louder, and the divide among people has grown deeper and deeper, whether it's on religious issues or whether it's on the economic disparity. A report from 2019 by Oxfam found that the top 9 richest Indians had wealth equivalent to 50% of the country. So there is a very, very wide divide among lots of disparity among the people. Then again, free speech is in danger. We are seeing how journalists who are trying to, since I'm a journalist, I can see the journalists who are trying to report on social and environmental issues are being held under very extreme laws of terrorism. And there are many people who have been sent to jail for drawing simple cartoons as well. So there's a general sense of intolerance that has been growing over the past around 6 or 8 years since the current government has come into power, is what I would say. But since we're talking about youth and about young women who are participating in these issues, I can also see, and I'm also trying to participate in opposition to this kind of clampdown on different rights of different groups of people. Once again, India has a very strong history of youth involvement in social movements. Many people who are now elected representatives start as student politicians, and they work their way up to being very strong, powerful elected leaders right now. A friend who's a socio-political activist, Radhika, I was discussing this with her. She believes that 2016 was a turning point for India in terms of youth involvement in social issues. Um, Jawaharlal Nehru University is one of the prominent universities of the country in Delhi. The student politicians, the student activists, and student leaders over there were able to bring some issues into the limelight very strongly, and some of them have gone on to participate in elections, have gotten the chance to represent the different social issues in the media. Then again, towards the end of last year, towards the end of 2019 and in the beginning of 2020, when the citizenship laws were discussed in the country, there was a very strong movement, and it looked like a leaderless movement, which was led a lot by the youth of the country in Delhi, then which is the capital of India, and also in different parts of the country, where a lot of young people came out onto the streets to protest this demand for uh, I'm so sorry, to protest this citizenship law that would be very discriminatory for certain communities. Mm, then, since I'm an environmental reporter, I have also been observing how the environmental issues have been taken, have gathered steam over the last few years. This also has a history in the 1970s and before, when one movement called the Chipko movement it's very popular in the environmental discussion, where women were able to protect the trees in the mountains in Uttarakhand by standing right in front of them and hugging the trees. And then progressively there have been great laws to protect the environment. And now I feel, since the lockdown, this has become more prominent. I think that young people are more involved in these discussions due to their ease simply because of the ease with technology. And they're able to drive campaigns, they're able to use social media quite effectively to at least highlight the issues and at least discuss those issues. Whether a change is possible at this point is difficult to say, but at least the young people have brought these issues into the limelight. Watching someone like Greta Thunberg highlight climate issues so strongly and so effectively has been inspiring for many kids in the country as well.
Thank you so much, Shatakshi, for a very insightful update on what's happening in India and also how global movement has affecting the national situations. I will now request Rafaela to also share about what's currently happening in Philippines today, and perhaps like insight on the state of democracy in the country that you want to share with the participants. But before that, I actually want to remind you that translation to Bahasa Indonesia are available. So you can click the globe button on the left bottom of your Zoom screen, and then you can press Germany. When you press Germany translations, you will be able to hear the translations to Bahasa Indonesia. And also, I think from Shatakshi presentations or rather answer, you also will have some burning questions, and we will have question and answer after this. But perhaps right now you can type down the question in Q&A button on the left bottom of your Zoom. So with that, Rafaela, the floor is yours to share about the state of democracy in Philippines right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I just want to say apologies in advance. My internet is a bit unstable. So I will, if I stop, just chat, and maybe if the connection is not great, please just notify me in the chat. But yeah, I think when we talk about democracy in the Philippines right now, I was trying to take notes of what are the different multiple crises that we have been facing in relation to democratic backsliding in the Philippines. But as a context, I realized that many of the people talking about democracy in the Philippines center it on the rise of one particular strongman who has put the Philippines back on the map as far as in the global map, no, as far as discussions about democracy is, because we have a very colorful president now. But I realized though that he, in a way, is an outcome of the very highly undemocratic systems that we have in place for decades. Even if we've had democratization in 1986, democracy has not really deepened so much that people are in the positions of power. I remember joining the activist movement, and many of my mentors would call our democracy elite democracy. Our presidents, almost all of our presidents in the past since we began, came from political dynasties. Some are mothers, and they're the father and daughter of each other. So to a certain extent, the level of crisis in democracy that we have right now is a natural outcome. Our president was bound to happen because of the, again, highly undemocratic practices that we have. But let me highlight at least 5 crises that we've been experiencing as far as, again, democracy is concerned. The first one is the crisis on human rights, which I think is also very evident with the major policy that our government is highlighting with the drug war. The United Nations Human Rights Council recently, just this year, a few months ago, released resolution saying that, a report rather, that again, the human rights crisis is something that government is to a certain extent puts the government highly accountable, because its policies is actually instigating a lot of the human rights violations, with over 30,000 extrajudicial killings because of the drug war. But apart from the looking at the drug concern in the Philippines as a war, again, a very masculine way of looking at that campaign, you also see several other human rights being trampled upon, including, of course, some of his pronouncements against young women activists. He even said on national TV that you can shoot in the vagina women activists. And that's really something to worry about, hearing the most powerful person committing such violence. Even the president admitted that he harassed one of their employee when he was young. So again, there's a crisis of human rights, especially women's rights at this point. But there's also a crisis in governance. COVID-19, the response to COVID-19 is a botched response, so much so that we come in and out of the top 10 in terms of COVID cases in the Philippines. And I think we compete with Indonesia, I think, getting in and out of the top 10. But also botched the crisis in governance in terms of prioritizing the anti-terrorism law over the COVID response. The typhoon that hit us recently, several typhoons, a super typhoon even hit the Philippines, and the president is nowhere to be seen. And he just recently entered into a meltdown because our vice president, a strong woman, is the one who is taking charge of the response in the typhoon, and he cannot, again, is nowhere to be found. And you see several things where government is not really delivering, apart from the COVID-19 and the typhoon response. Even in the climate crisis, they would put white sand, artificial responses with regards to pollution in the Metro Manila. The third crisis that we can highlight is, of course, the crisis on truth. And it's not something that is unique to the Philippines. I think it's a global phenomenon. But one thing that happened recently is, of course, the shutdown of the biggest media company here, ABS-CBN, which for us, we thought was impossible. But now they were able to shut down again the biggest media. And on the other hand, you have state-sponsored radio stations, channels propagating fake news that people empower themselves, uh, even the ones echoing some of the misinformation, even in the midst of a pandemic. And maybe I will go to the fourth crisis, which I think is also the crisis of sovereignty. Our international policy is one that is also very macho. But in terms of projection, our president, however, is still, we can see him selling Philippine interests to, on the one hand, to China, allowing Chinese telecommunications inside our military compound, also selling to Russia, telling them to use us as guinea pigs for their vaccine, and even to the Americans, releasing Pemberton. He was one of those, and this was a battle of our LGBT, for LGBT community, because Pemberton, an American military man who killed a transgender a few years back, who was put in jail but pardoned by our president. So again, you see here our country delivering, or rather compromising, our interests. But I will end perhaps with the last crisis, I think, which is also very related to our feminist discussion, which is, for me, a crisis, a deficit in kindness and society building and relationship building. I think the worst part of what's happening right now is that there's just this overwhelming feeling of othering within society. And the care work that we've been working on in restorative justice and, just building bridges between different factions, suddenly it feels so hard right now. You can't even talk to the other people on the other fence. And it's the young people right now are facing a very divided world, and it's just something that, for me, is one of the most alarming things that's happening right now. Again, the very fabric of who we want to be as a community, and the very idea of not seeing other people who think otherwise as human beings worthy of respect. And again, that deficit of kindness that we're seeing right now is something that worries me as we work on democracy and also feminism in the Philippines and in Asia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rafaela, for sharing a very comprehensive insight on the situation in Philippines. We are not only dealing with democracy deficits, but also human rights, or rather women's rights crisis, and also the governance, and also basically like a justice system are failing, and repressive laws like anti-terror laws, as well as the emergency decree to respond to COVID-19 are really affecting civic space, but also young women and human rights defenders in the Philippines. I think that's a very important point, and we definitely will need to revisit that again during the question and answer sessions. So with that, we have the third speaker, Pop, from Thailand, who will share with us a video on what's currently happening in the country. So Pop, time is yours.
So let me show you the picture of a feminist movement inside the pro-democratic movement in Thailand right now. Please wait. So we have activity in the protest, like we give the free pad and we paint the pussy. We do the like a gallery of the pussy. So we let the protester like coloring pussy. So it's called like sex work is work, and we promoting the rights of sex workers. So our movement is a collective movement. We have a so we give free pad, and then we have a campaign, My Body, My Choice. We show up pride flags in the pro-democratic protest. We want people to learn that pussy have many color, and we promote sex worker rights and trans women. So we have pussy gallery, as you see. So we want to change the law that we want to decriminalize the sex work. So we made I think it's the biggest pride flags in Southeast Asia, like 15 meters, to show we want to raise awareness on the gender issue in the pro-democratic movement. Sorry. So we also talking about the student uniform, about the sexual harassment in university and school. So we have a big pride flags, as you see. This is inside of the protest that demanding for democracy and demanding for the reform of the monarchy. So we write My Body, My Choice in our body. You can see we wear a bar because in Thailand it's still illegal to no bra for women. So nipple is not free in Thailand. So men can topless, but not for women. So we raise the voice of every genders, and we want to say that it's the same thing with the democracy that we ask for, like the rights of gender issue is the same thing with democracy. Okay, so I stopped sharing my screen, and so sorry for the first pass, but
Fine, it's fine. Perhaps you can dig deeper on the reflections of what's currently happening in Thailand, as you have shared like the engagement of young feminists in the pro-democracy protests that has been happening since the beginning of this year.
yes, sure. So the political climate in Thailand is start from the coup in 2014, and then after the coup, the military government wrote a new constitution and make us to do the referendums, and then the constitution passed, so we call it military constitution. Then with that constitution we have elections last years, and and then the military parties won. So the situation is kind of very similar to Myanmar right now. So we have a constitution, but it's drafted by the military. So people after the 2014, we don't have this kind of big protest. We have like quite a small protest, like a few hundreds of people, because the military kind of arrest us and or charge us with or sues us. So kind of people scared of the military. But then in these years before the COVID start, there is an uprising of the student from many university in Bangkok, say that they will not fear anymore because they cannot stand with this kind of like have no freedoms and the economy is so bad. And then we face the COVID, so everything stopped. The protest also stopped at that time because the government using the emergency laws, so people kind of will be charged if you're like gathering more than 5. And but then after the series of the COVID lockdown, people come up to the street right now since the August this year. So a lot of like the most people that we have, like we have more than a few 100,000 come to the street and protest. And then right now we come up with the 3 demands. One is the prime minister needs to be resigned. The Prayut Chan-o-cha, he is a prime minister. He is also head of the military coup d'etat at that time, and also now he is a prime minister. And we want the second demand, we want a new constitution that come from people. And the third demand, we want to reform the monarchy. So you can see that Thailand have more layer of the oppression. It's not only military, it's not only poverty, but also the monarchy. So we have many things to fight with. So, and also for feminist movement, this time is the first time that we join clearly like we have normally we join with the movement, we fight along with them, but the movement never count women who fight with pro-democratic movement. But this time is the first time that a feminist gathering together and show up that we have our own movement and we want to voice up the voice of women and feminists and LGBT people. So you can see that we very engaged in the protest, and we also want to show our identity. We make a flags, and so I can say that this time of pro-democratic movement in Thailand is very diverse, and they have more vision on the society that we expect to every gender, but not every so the protest is not happening only in Bangkok, but happening across the countries. So it's not every protest that understand the gender issues and the women rights. So we try to put the agenda on the women rights, LGBT rights in the every protest across Thailand. So we want to promote the idea. So we follow the demands of the protesters, that we want to reform the monarchy and we want new constitutions, and also we want, and we will have one plus the demands that we fight against the patriarchy society. So okay, this is what happening in Thailand and feminist movement.
Thank you so much for that information, Bob. I think it's been very encouraging to see the progress of the pro-democracy movement in Thailand. I think that's probably one of our shining star in the region, and hopefully the effort come to fruition very soon. So now we have Fifi from Indonesia, and would be good if you can share about what's currently happening in Indonesia, Fifi, and perhaps also some reflections on whether the public spaces, including assembly and protest for women and LGBTIQ, are already safe, or is there anything that we need to know about what's happening? So floor is yours, Fifi.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you so much, everyone, for the opportunity. It's so interesting for me to listen how different, but also how similar the challenge on democracy that we are facing in Asia. But I am totally agree with Rafaela on how Indonesia and Philippines has been competing in which country is the worst in dealing with COVID-19 pandemic. It's such a shame that we have to compete in this nonsense ugly battle. But anyway, I just also think that, like, you know, what Rafaela mentioned about how our country has been dealing, how bad our country has been dealing with COVID pandemic itself. It shows the result on how undemocratic our government system has been. So it's just kind of like, you know, like, because how democratic it is, so it's resulted into something you know, like this, that unfortunately has you know, like, it take a lot of victims, in a sense. There are a lot of people who are dying in because how bad the government has been dealing with COVID-19 pandemic itself. But in some sense, but in a more broader, or like a general overview, I also see that I can see how big the solidarity among movement towards Asia, especially that we see a lot in social media, the hashtag, the retweet of, like, you know, like the calls, demands on each movement. Especially we see it from the movement in Thailand, the movement from Hong Kong as well. Like, we've seen it everywhere in social media. So I can see that, in a sense, there is a big solidarity among movement in Asia itself. If I must, you know, like, explain how democracy, the situation of democracy in Indonesia itself, I just felt like it's just in a very, very bad situation right now. As Indonesian, I have to witness on how our government is somehow, we were talking about the COVID-19 pandemic itself, has been putting their people as the least priority itself. And in a more horrible situation, I just felt like the government has been, you know, like, using this situation, the global pandemic, to pass some law that is definitely harming society. A lot of people might know, you know, like, the omnibus law of the job creation that has been, that, I mean, in a sense, the content itself, it's been, you know, like, the content itself is definitely harming a lot of people, especially, you know, labor workers. Environment issue as well is very highly, you know, damaged with the passing of the omnibus law of job creation itself. And we can see how undemocratic the process of passing the bill has been. Like, we see, you know, like, when the bill passed, they do it secretly, like, in the middle of the night. And also, like, they were, you know, like, the number of pages keep changing over and over again until it was eventually signed by the president itself. So this has been a lot of issue as well, in terms of what are the law that should be prioritizing by the government itself, when we have lots of law that I personally feel like this is the law that are supposed to be an urgency for the government to pass, the House of the Parliament to pass. For example, like me, as a feminist activist itself, and with Jakarta Feminist, with Holabek Jakarta, we have been focusing on the anti-sexual violence draft bill that has been an ongoing process in the House of Parliament for the past almost more than 6 years now, and it's still hanging there. And like in the middle of this year, we need to be faced by the House of Parliament expelled the draft of the anti-sexual violence bill draft itself, with the reason that it is too difficult for them to discuss. And it created a big, it created a big, how do I say, like a outrage in social media. Like, I mean, obviously, like you were talking about you discussing law in air-conditioned room, and you said it's too difficult comparing to what the victims of sexual violence in Indonesia has been, suffered from all of the trauma and everything that happened to them. In a sense, but however, in a sense, I can, with the movement itself, with the democracy, the way that a lot of activists, a lot of civil society demanding on democracy itself, I just felt like the solidarity among human rights activists towards women's issue, towards gender-based violence issue, or gender issue itself, especially on gender minority, like LGBTIQ community, it's very, very limited, or we can say that there's lack of solidarity among human rights activists when it comes to women's issue. During Reformasi di Korupsi in 2019, which is last year, or it's a reformation is being corrupted, we can see that like there is a lot of divisions among this members, among the people who actually go to the street and protesting towards, the the anti-corruption bill, the omnibus law, the what else? There's so many laws that were being demanded at that time. If I'm not wrong, there were 7 demands at that time. But somehow, when we're talking about the anti-sexual violence draft bill, like people are being super divided, despite that we know how bad sexual violence is happening in Indonesia, to the point that when we were protesting, we still have to receive sexual violence among the people who are actually protesting for democracy. So in a sense, there is a big movement that is going on in Indonesia in terms of, demanding democracy, demanding human rights, but somehow a lot of these human rights activists also cannot see that women's rights is also human rights, that they tend to forget that, public space, also the protest or the protest space itself, it should be a safe space for, a woman itself. I was once saying that during the protest, there was a lot of people saying like, oh, woman, you should be at the back. We're here to protect you. And it's just like, I don't need your protection. Like, we are here not as, an object for you to quote unquote protect, but we also have the voice for us to are the subjects of the, the movement itself. So yeah, in a sense, that's, we can discuss more on like, the roles of young feminists, especially a feminist movement in Indonesia later on the next question. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fifi. But while you are here with us, I'm also keen to hear about your reflection, especially your experiences on the role of young people, especially young women and feminists in the protection of peace and democracy movement. Because you mentioned that solidarity among human rights movement towards women and LGBTIQ are very limited, and it's showcased by how women are still receiving sexual and gender-based violence during peaceful protests that requesting for democracy. And that's, I think, a very interesting point of view because coming from human rights organizations, I can definitely vouch that it is very difficult to talk about women's rights issues internally with other human rights defenders. So it would be good to have your reflections on the role of youth, especially young women and feminists in the democracy movement.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like a lot of things, especially when we're doing it online right now, I felt like it is very important for us young fem. It is also, in a sense, it's very stereotyping towards young people itself on how young people is always being identified by people who are very tech savvy, like engaging in social media. But in a sense, also, it's not wrong. I mean, like, social media or like online space, we consider this as a public space itself, where that's where conversation happen, that's where narrative happen. So I felt like one of the roles that young people is currently doing right now in Indonesia is on how we can, reclaim the space and the conversation and the narration that is happening online right now. For example, I think there was like this big issue on environmental where there's this big Korean, the big Korean company that was basically claiming a lot of lands, forests in Indonesia, and actually jeopardizing a lot of environmental issue I think in Papua. And the K-pop, I think like this is something that we need to also highlight, like how the K-pop fans actually creating their own movement. They are very aware about like what's going on in the world, like the human rights issue itself. So they were like basically like making noises on social media. We see there was also like this big, we call it, people very familiar with the word revenge porn, despite that I don't really like that name. We call it the non-consensual distributions of intimate image of like a very famous a public figure in Indonesia. And the like young people who are very that is very engaging in social media, they are trying to bury like all of those people who are sharing this online, the content of this public figure by how do you say, like writing the hashtag itself. So, but in a sense, it is also very complicated because of this stereotype as well. So a lot of time that young feminists were not being taken seriously because a lot of people many activists only see young people as someone who can do campaign instead of despite that we can actually contribute something that is more substantial. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was like kick out for a few seconds because of internet glitch. This is our reality, I think. When we say about reclaiming the space and conversations, I think we need to also be mindful about the digital divide that we are living in, that access internet is somehow a privilege. So thank you so much for that, Fifi. Perhaps I can go with Rafaela. Rafaela, what's your reflection about the role of youth, especially young women and feminists, in the democracy movement, not only in Philippines but also like globally? Because you mentioned about the importance of taking back the space against this macho patriarchal head of states.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much again, Rachel. I'll jump off with what Anindya is saying about expectations with young people, and sometimes especially with this very online world. But some of the things I've been mulling over actually the past few weeks is that this generation, I actually think they're the younger ones. I'm a millennial, but you have now the Generation Z, so the younger ones. I think they're facing really peculiar historical events that can change the course of society at large. They're facing existential threats, like the very existence of humans as we think. You have democracy as an existential threat. Is democracy, as others are saying, failing us? So you have the rise of populism. There's an existential threat of climate change, and it's like a ticking time bomb. And now we have the pandemic that, to a certain extent, a lot have already been warning about, but yet we're still not prepared. So there's just so much existential threats that young people are facing, and the question is, what are they gonna do? Because these are defining struggles. So what is this generation going to do in the face of this? And in a way, there's this pressure on young people because the perception is they are the ones who can think out of the box. These are unprecedented threats, and hopefully young people who are still idealistic and can provide certain new solutions to these threats. But that expectation on young people also the multiple threats also put this social anxiety that young people are experiencing. And I think it's very evident on how they're lashing out. They're very angry. There's so much mental health mental health conditions that young people are facing, especially with always the pressure of always being connected. Like even in our young activist circles right now, being present is not anymore being physically present in meetings. It's being online and connected. Like you're angry at people for going online because you need to meet them on Zoom for an output or a deliverable. So, presence is online presence. You're not present in the community if you're not online. So if your internet is poor, it's not anymore being present in the rally. It's being able to tweet. It's being able to have a say on Facebook. So the pressure and the anxiety is so high. And I think the response to this is, again, necessarily feminist. I think the response to this, or rather, before I go to that, the challenge now is, how do you manage to respond to these existential threats that seem so urgent? Like you have to answer to climate change now because we might not survive it. You have to answer to the typhoon and conduct relief operations because people are hungry and people are dying, and also on COVID. So you have to urgently respond because everything is so, again, urgent. But at the same time, you're anxious. You need to just step back. So how do you negotiate the pressures of the demand of acting, the demand of the call to action, versus the demand for trying to care for the traumas that this world is putting upon you? And it is traumatic to this generation. So how do you heal? Is there even time to heal amidst that trauma? So again, I think the response to that is necessarily a feminist response. And it's something that we still need to figure out. But I guess what I'm saying is, when we build democratic spaces, when we deepen democracy, I think democratic spaces necessarily needs to be safe spaces. And that's the whole point. It's when we build movements, when we build activism, it necessarily needs to expand safe spaces where people can talk, but they can also heal. They can where they can be heard, their voices, and you can call for accountability, but it's also a space where you can heal. But again, that's the question of how remains, no? But I think, again, democratic spaces necessarily needs to be safe spaces. What do I mean by that? The online is not, we're saying that there's democracy when we talk online, but it's not a safe space. There's so much violence there, gender-based violence especially. Our homes now, Christmas is around the corner. For some of us who celebrate Christmas, there will be reunions, but our houses, our families become unsafe spaces for discussion. And that's alarming, that even our homes become unsafe. And our movements, even our social, our movements, feminist, socialist, social democratic movements, labor movements, are also becoming unsafe, where people ask how woke you are. So even longtime activists are being pushed outside of feminist circles because they're not feminist enough or they're not woke enough. And it's really disturbing how this trend of, othering even within our movement. So, I just was listening to this journalist saying he had to let go because or get out of his organization because the people there thought he was not left enough. So when he said a dissenting opinion, it was automatically, he was automatically canceled, #cancel culture. So again, how do you make democratic spaces safe spaces, and how do you make accountability, calls for accountability, feminist as well, and not something that dehumanizes when someone says something that is against what we think? So I suppose I will end with that. And again, the question of how do you make sure that when we call for accountability, it is also healing? Because again, these strong men and these perpetrators, these people in the military, for instance, in our governments, who are creating violence, to a certain extent, also experience certain systemic violence themselves from their superiors, from the expectations that we have, the patriarchy, as you said, Rachel. So how do we get them how do we see them as also people who need healing? So I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rafaela. I think hearing you is really therapeutical for me, and there's a lot of resonate perceptions within me. I think it's very true about your observations on the othering culture and how we see things in a polarized way. It's only black and white. There is no room for discussion, and hence it's affecting the ability to create a safe space for movement building itself. I think that's a very good point, and I'm keen to hear more, probably through the questions from the participants. So before we move ahead with other speakers, I actually would like to really encourage participants to share their questions in the chat box or perhaps in the Q&A box, because right after this we will have interaction sessions with all of you. And after hearing from Fifi and Rafaela, I'm also keen to hear from Shatakshi. So in your opinion, what's the role of young women, young feminists in the movement for democracy, or perhaps the environmental movement, because you are a very instrumental activist in the environmental movement itself. So Shatakshi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachel. So I'd like to come back to one point that Anindya made about how some people were trying to protect them while they were out there protesting for their own rights. And this is seen very commonly. I've seen this very commonly in India as well. So I'd like to talk about how women are viewed in India. On one hand, there are many female deities. So women are seen as gods, but they also need protecting, and they need their dignity needs to be protected. So there's this contrast of being godlike and also needing protection. But at the same time, India is such a vast country that it also has had matriarchal societies. Patriarchy is very deep in many parts of the country. Then I've seen examples of how, while reporting, I've seen local representatives, elected representatives, females, who have been chosen by the people, but are propped up by their husbands or by their family just because it was a woman's seat for that time. But most of the decisions are still controlled by the man. While all of this is happening in the recent past, as I was saying in the beginning, that in 2016, when there was this shift in how youth and women participated in the conversation politically, in the social movements that were going on, there were groups of young women who were coming together. I can mention one example of a Delhi group called Pinjara Toad. Pinjara means cage and Toad means break. So they were fighting for equal rights in their hostels where their windows had shutters, and they were not allowed to go out past 5 p.m. in the evening, where while male students could go out, say, till 11 in the night, lounge around in their lawns. So they were trying to break past this very basic restriction that they were put into in hostels, in universities of higher education. From groups like this, some young women have emerged to lead these social conversations, to lead these social movements. The citizenship of laws that were opposed at the beginning of the year were led by some very inspiring young women who again were arrested and put into prison for being at the forefront of this conversation. Then again, in India, there are very strong laws for sexual assault. In 2012, when a woman in her early 20s was brutally raped, and then after a few months, she died, unfortunately, another strong law was made called the Nirbhaya law. This is when many women again came out to demand these changes. But while I can see this progress also happening, when I look at my workspace, I can see how I still have to fight to get my voice heard. I still have to fight being talked over. In very simple, these little things are still bother again and again. Um, I've heard from other women, senior women, who are not addressed in meetings. The man in the meeting will be spoken to, but the woman might not be spoken to. So it's just very disheartening to see that we have to fight the same fight again and again, along with older women, also for our younger peers in the room. So it's very confusing that there are such progressive things happening, but I still have to fight the same battles again and again, day in and day out. So like Rafaela was also saying, that the mental cost, the emotional cost of these battles is very heavy. And while trying to fight these battles on a personal front, you're also constantly going at different issues. The environment is constantly under strike in India, and day in and day out, I can see all my colleagues firefighting to save that one little piece of land. So it's extremely confusing, and it's very likely that a lot of the people who I work with are can be unhappy. And I feel like there comes a point when a lot of us switch off from what is happening, but it's not so easy to switch off also. We keep coming back to the same thing and battling the same things again and again. But today I feel like, after hearing that the situation is very similar in most places, I feel like there will also be solutions that can work in most places. So I'm very hopeful after hearing all of you speak.
Thank you so much, Shatakshi. So now, Bob, you've been sharing situations in Thailand and how you can utilize the pro-democracy protests to also promote gender equality, like and affirmative sexuality of women. So it would be really key to hear from your perspective about the role of young people, especially young women and feminists, in protection of peace and democracy in Thailand. Or perhaps if you want to also respond on the reflections that other speakers have shared earlier, that would be really good as well. So, Bob, the time is yours.
Sure, thank you, Rachel. I would like to mention about young people who joining the protest right now is very lower age, so they coming like from 10 to 18. So we have a movement of high school students who come and protest against the education system, and also want the democracy, but they also want to reform the education system in Thailand. And you can see after like these young people come out, and the government doing like charge them even they are under 18. So right now we have like 4 cases of young people under 18 years old who were charged by the law, like they break the emergency laws because of the emergency law is for the COVID, but they use this emergency law to stop us from protesting. So they charged more than 90 people already after the uprisings start in August. So like also we not scared, so people still come up to the street and they try to break up the protest by using tear gas and violence. You can see they use tear gas to young people. Like many people are under 18 joining the protest in Bangkok, and then they use tear gas. And also they allow how can I say, 2 sides of the protesters. So people who they let like we protest to reform the monarchy and democracy, and they also allows the loyalist protesters come and face each other. so that there are violence happen. So they use so they're using gun and knife for to pro democratic protest. So so the police allow two protester, two side of the protester to fight against each other. So people were shot. Luckily, no one lost their life in the fight, and so right now they use the violence against us to stop the protest, and then they start to use the very strong laws like ley majesté law. It's the law to protect the kings. They use these laws, and also they use the laws to protect the queen and the son of the kings. This law is have very serious how can I say, like you can be arrested for 10 years by by assault the queens and the families of the monarchy. So they start using the serious law to stop us from protest. But the protest still happen in every week. The big protest still happen in every week, and they still using tear gas, the sounds, the strong something strong sounds, and many way to stop us. So the law of young people is very important this time because in the past we have red shirts movement that were destroyed strongly. Around 10 years ago, we have a red shirts movement with us also demand for democracy, but then they were destroyed. Many people leave the country, and many people lost their life in Laos. In Thai refugees live in Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and they lost their life in Laos. And one of our young activists disappeared in Vietnam and in Cambodia. So we know that they already passed away. Young people were killed, were stopped, were shot, but we also lead the movement. So because older generation, they were destroyed already, they were shot, many hundreds were arrested and stay in the prisons and dying in the prisons. So like kind of older generation lets youth lead the movement right now. So right now younger generations who lead the movement kind of try to encourage red shirt, the old movement, the elders to join us, because we try to tell them that this movement is not only for young people but for everyone. Yes, but it's but young people still lead the movement across the country.
Thank you so much, Pop. I think that was a very interesting, engaging, and insightful response that four of our panelists have shared in the past 1 hour. So now we are moving on to the interaction session, so the question and answer sessions. I'm sure most of you will have burning questions, and on that, please put your questions in the chat box or even in question and answers. Well, we have one question from Chi Cho. Apologize if I mispronounce your name, but her question is, how do we address the issues that the word human is almost always automatically read as man, and more often than not is unconscious? So I think would be really good if any panelists would like to respond on the questions that you can find in the question and answer box. So anyone would like to respond on the question from Shichi Cho?
To be honest, I don't know the exact answer, but I just felt it's an internalized sexism that somehow we are basically kind of like, we're not born being sexist, but it's something that we learn, right? So I just felt like one of the way that we can, kind of like eradicate this internalized sexism is definitely to unlearn the sexism itself. I mean, there's so many way and so many method on how we can do it, but it's definitely, it's not easy. Even like sometimes I myself is not immune to this kind of biases, and also because I grew up in this patriarchal society that is basically, like the sexism itself is very, very internalized in our community as well. So I just felt like this is a big, it's a big question. I don't know exactly what is the answer, but I just felt like there's this problem that the way that we can do it is definitely to unlearn what we have been unlearned for a very long time, and it's very rooted in our society as well. So it's definitely like a big job to do. And I felt like it's not just only the word human itself. There's in so many ways the sexism itself is very internalized. There are so many words that is being associated to a certain gender. There are so many profession as well that is being associated to many genders. So yeah, I mean, I feel free to jump into what I just said.
Thank you so much, Fifi, for putting your perspective on this. Definitely, it's going to be our responsibility as well to try to demystify associations on human as men, because it's our conscious effort against patriarchy. It's also very interesting to see that language is political. So we need to looking at like beyond gender binary definitions of our gender identity and expressions. So with that, perhaps I want to ask Rafaela if you have any additional insight from Fifi on how we can, address the issues that's most of the time human is always automatically read as man.
I think a large part of it is representation, and it's not just having, a woman in the room, no? It's seeing them in multiple roles. I realized, I'm sure many of us who have been working at home have been watching a lot of series and movies and things like that, and even YouTube. And I realized I've been more increasingly, I think it was actually my boyfriend who told me this, that, hey, you've always been asking me to watch TV series with strong women. And he was joking that too many women already in my, strong women in leading roles. And I wasn't conscious about that before, but I realized that, I think the last 3 series I've watched are led by women. And I think that it's not just in culture and media, and seeing them in different colors of women and different shapes, different personalities, not just the goody one or the more liberal one, and different shades of women, but also in positions of power. I think in government and also within the movement. I think I've been lucky because most of my workmates are women, and I realize I love also working with fellow women, and I think again seeing them. Seeing women grow in different positions of power can also help.
Thank you. There's also a second question from Rizky Fabriani. How government respond towards each democracy movement in your different countries? Is there any achievement toward better democracy? So maybe for this, I would like to request Shatakshi to address it, if that's okay. Thank you.
So I can talk from one of the recent examples of an environmental movement of since I think it started around March or April, where the environment impact assessment law was about to be changed, and there was a very solid campaign online, not offline, of course, because of COVID. And the fear was that the government is trying to push this through during the pandemic so that many people don't respond to it. Many people don't have a say in what is happening in an already weakened law. And even after many letters were written to the government, too many people weren't hopeful of a very positive response. And I think that's the way, that's the reaction of the government to most protests, most movements, that they let people do their thing, but not really come out and change too much. Yeah, very broadly, very generically, this is what I feel, that the government is not too positive in uh, actually making the changes that people have asked for.
Thank you, Satakshi. Bob, do you also want to respond on perhaps explaining about your government response toward the pro-democracy movement? And also, is there any achievement towards better democracy that you saw in Thailand?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, the government not give up. They because we give them many ways to get out peacefully. Like we try to we have 100,000 names, say that we want to amend the constitutions so that we can have the fairly elections that but just 2 days ago the government won't accept that offer. They just reject our laws that want to amend the constitution. So now we get to the point that no way out. So so um so we the question is there any achievement? I think there is achievement because comparing to 6 years ago since the coup happened, this time is the biggest time of the protest who come out to the street and like we can call Thai uprisings. But this achievement, but we not yet see clear way to get out because it shows that the government and the monarchy not give up. Maybe because our demand is very high. We want the monarchy to reform because for us the monarchy is the point of the center of the every problem in Thailand, and we want it to be reformed. And then they how can I say, they will not give up, because if they give up everything would change. From their side they will lose everything, I think. So we do every peaceful thing. We sending a letter to the kings. It's the first time that many people, like a crowd, the protesters come together and walk to the palace and sending a letter to the kings. It's us, how can I say, but we not yet have clear plan to achieve anything, or the government not yet don't have any clear plan. They said they will do the amend of the constitutions, but their draft is very badly, is also the same with the one that we're using now. So I am not yet see any way out.
Thank you so much, Pop.
Rachel,
Yes.
I'd just like to jump in here very
Oh,
briefly
please.
to say thank you. To say that in the first part of my answer, I focused too much on the negative, but I have two positive examples also, where the state. Yeah, where the state environment minister was fairly instrumental in stopping one metro portion from going through a very old forest area in the capital of the state that I live in, Mumbai. And now many environmentalists are positive that he will respond in the same manner in an effort to protect the biodiversity, to conserve the biodiversity. So to add to whether governments are responding positively to people's demands or people's protest, I think it's not the government as a whole that always fails. It's also single individuals who respond positively, who sometimes understand certain issues better than the others, who are able to give us good decisions. And it has happened in the recent past, so I'm slightly hopeful as well.
Thank you. Better things are coming, Shatakshi. So we also receive two more questions. Are youth movement in different countries learning from each other? And how young feminist movement can support each other across the countries to fight for democracy? I would like to ask all the panelists to respond to these questions, as well as giving your final statements before we end the sessions. So perhaps if any panelists would like to volunteers to tackle the question, that would be really good. Perhaps I can ask Fifi first, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. I was actually going to unmute my microphone.
Oh, that's nice. I can read your mind.
We are so in sync. What was the question? Sorry. I mean, like, yes, obviously, I felt like we learned so much from each other. Like, for example, like this is also something that I forgot to mention earlier about like the roles of young feminists itself, is like how a lot of us actually started like our own movement, because with us, like Jakarta Feminist itself, we started Women's March Jakarta in 2017, which resulted, like, one of the reasons why we do it, but Olin is also actually one of the initiator of Women's March Jakarta, is because we see that before Women's March Jakarta, we see lack of enthusiasms towards young people talking about human rights issue, especially on feminist issue itself. But however, when we see there are a lot of other young people like actually voicing their opinion, and there is such a big momentum of where we can actually go out there and talking about issue that rarely being talked about in public, which is like sexual violence issue, sexual and reproductive health and rights issue, gender minority issues, and all of those discriminations that we face as a woman and also marginalized groups. I just felt like this is something that we can do, and it resulted in such an overwhelmingly positive reactions from youth, especially young feminists in Indonesia, especially at that time in Jakarta. We started with around 800 to 1,000 people marching with us, and mainly actually like consists of mainly young people, and this is something that like it's definitely empowering for us, and eventually it created like such a movement all over Indonesia. At that time, like the next year, we have 15 other cities across Indonesia that are actually also doing Women's March. Our interpreter here, Mia, is also actually the coordinators of the Women's March Jakarta in 2019, and we had like around like 20 more of like like a Women's March Jakarta, Women's March Indonesia in Indonesia. And in terms of other countries, I just felt like this is also something that we have been doing a lot. We see like based on this discussion, I just felt like we learned so much by looking through our similarity and also our differences in dealing with on the issue itself, and how we actually deal with the issue itself. And I learned so much from everyone. With the Women's March itself, we have other Women's March across Asia. We are in a very close connection with Women's March Malaysia, for example, because we feel like a very strong connections towards the issue, and also maybe the natures of the like the issue, the
the conservatism that is growing in Malaysia and also Indonesia. We learn so much from there. We share a lot about, you know, like our challenges, the criminalization that has to be faced by our activists, especially feminist activists, and how we overcome that. And this session itself, I saw pop videos on, you know, the movement that they've been doing in Thailand. It gave me a lot of inspiration, which also, but somehow like I was like, this is something that will be so cool for us to do in Indonesia, but also in the back of my head, oh, I need to remember the law, the security that is, you know, being faced by our community or our, if we do this kind of movement, like, but it gave me a lot of inspiration. So yeah, so that's how I felt like, but it in a sense, we also need more, you know, platform like this for us to be able to learn from each other. We did Feminist Festival every 2 years in Jakarta, which also, it is led by Jakarta Feminist, where last year we were talking about feminist movement in Asia, where we invited like several panelists from Malaysia, from the Philippines, from where else? Singapore at that time, that we can basically also discuss about like, you know, like situation that is going on in each country itself and learn from each other. So yeah, and in a sense, that's also how we can support each other across the country to fight for democracy. Showing solidarity, I felt like it's also like being a big part of, you know, like the way that we can kind of like overcome, just like the song that we listened earlier. I just felt like this big solidarity, and I mentioned earlier about how like when we see in social media, like what we did in correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we did in a Women's March in 2019 and 2018, we asked every country to send us a letter so we can basically also read it in front of our crowd. Like in 2019, we had around like maybe 5,000 people marching with us, and we read letters from Thailand, we read letters from Singapore about what the conditions that is happening right there. We read letters from Malaysia and also the Philippines, basically, you know, like also mentioning the solidarity that is, you know, that they have for what happened in Indonesia. So yeah, I think that's the part that we can do as a young feminist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fifi. May I go with Shatakshi next on whether you have additional insight on how we can support each other across the country to fight for democracy, and also your final statement for this session.
Yes. Like Anindya was saying, like Fifi was saying, that platforms like this are so vibrant and so positive that I'm feeling much better about my day today after a very long, hard day, from hearing about the similarities that everyone is, similarities in the fight, in the struggle that everyone is facing at individual and also at the larger social and government level. And I'd love to continue hearing from many other women like this, and reading reading pieces by women like this. I know it's very hard to come together every time to discuss in these longer formats, but seeing even those little memes or little jokes, it's very heartening. So along with myself, I'd love to urge everyone to keep writing, to keep creating nice, positive, inspiring content, inspiring artwork also. Then again, I feel the internet has made it easier for all of us to connect, but I do recognize the privilege that I have in being here, different caste privilege, class privilege, and also privilege of access that I would really like to be able to extend to many more people. And finally, while fighting for the space, while fighting to be heard, today I want to take away the point about kindness to women who I work with, but also to the men who I'm working with, because too many times there's too much aggression or too much opposition, while I think there are some men who are trying to fight this fight along with us. So it would be nice to have to move forward for these very difficult situations that we're all facing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Shatakshi. Rafaela, is there any report for you?
Okay, on the question on if there are exchanges, interestingly, I actually just came from a youth exchange with youth activists from Myanmar before this webinar. And it's really interesting to also hear their struggles in the same way that we're exchanging here. I think we can do more than experience exchange. I think a lot of the issues we're doing are have a global complexity to it. The pandemic is a global issue. Climate change is a global issue. China bullying is a global issue. So, you know, there are so many issues that we can actually build stronger alliances on. On one concrete example we've experienced the past year, in terms of exchange, are Filipino-American activists in the US who have set up student-led sexual assault resource centers in the US, who relocated here because one of these feminist activists is a Filipina-American. She relocated here and brought the same idea of a student-led sexual assault resource center here in the Philippines. So we're now setting it up in 3 universities in Metro Manila. We've trained students based from that successful idea that they've been doing in the US. We are now setting up and trained student responders who can respond in terms of mental health, in terms of legal, at least first aid for students within their universities who had experience of sexual assault within the university. So those kinds of experience exchange that can lead to something growing is something that definitely has been happening, and something that we need to expand further to respond to more global issues. And finally, I think as a final message, I want to perhaps highlight one word I've been reflecting on the past few weeks. The word is lift, to lift. I've been wondering how sometimes it's actually so hard to lift each other up. It's so easy in the social media world to call out other people for things that they're not doing, or they're doing badly, or, you know, so I think as in rebuilding the social fabric that we're continually losing, I think there's an intentionality towards lifting fellow feminists from different countries, fellow women, fellow gender minorities, again, to lift each other up, each other's voices. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Rafaela. So, Pop, any final comments from you before we end the session?
Yeah, so I want to answer the question that, like, did we learn from any country or learn from each other? So for Thailand movement, we have exchanged a lot with Myanmar's friends. Indonesia, we have a exchange dialogues on the protest that uprising right now. We also exchange the idea with the Hong Kong activists, Joshua, Nathan, everyone, and we also exchange with friends from Sunflower Movement from Taiwan. Also, we learn from the South Korea's movement. We have a very commit with the May 18 Foundation in South Korea, and also we also have, like, last years that the Thailand was the ASEAN host country for the conference. So we also have a feminist conference. I don't remember the but we also have a ASEAN feminist conference, a small one. So maybe we can do it again. And also the idea from Anindya, right? That for Thailand, we not yet have women march. We never have one, so maybe we should have one. And also, but we, like, feminist movement in Thailand work really closely with LGBT movement. So we have Pride March, but we not yet have Women March, and So in ASEAN we have LBQ movement, like LBQ network, lesbian, bisexual, queer woman network. So yes, not woman movement in Thailand not yet strong, but we will try to have one. But we will not call it as a like woman movement. Right now we kind of call it as a feminist movement to make it more inclusive, not only women, we want everyone, something like that. So and also we can do I suggest we in Thailand we're going to do a woman story telling, like a story from women in Thailand. So then we can do a collective story, women from Asia. So you can did you guys did you people saw the storybook, but it many of them are white women. So we should have one that are ASEAN, oh sorry, Asian story, woman tellings one. Because I try to connect with friends in Africa. They also want to do like African woman storytelling, so we can have like world woman storytelling. Yes, so that's my idea. So we can connect more, and then we can share, and we can have like Asia's network on feminist or women's movement.
Thank you so much, Pop. I think I would like to say many thanks for all the panelists who have been very grateful in sharing their insight and also even like recommendation on how to move forward with Pop, ideas on having a global South women's narrative to share about our young feminist movement. And I just want to give like a very short recap. I think all of the speakers agree that democracy is backsliding in Asia, and this is happening because of the macho patriarchal head of states that dismiss accountability and access to justice. We also see about the repressive laws across the countries and attacks to freedom of expressions, especially closing down of media in Philippines with the ABS-CBN, harassment to journalists in India, as well as the use of lese majesty against oppressions in Thailand. We also see how there is a limited space for women and LGBTIQ within the human rights movement, like Fifi's example on how there is catcalling and sexual gender-based violence during the protests for democracy in Indonesia. We also see how there is an increased othering, polarizations in as well as intolerance across the countries. But however, I think the young feminists and women that join this session, even like the allies, male and other genders, agree that we need to reclaim the space and lead the conversations. We have to create a safe space for discussions, and the young feminists across the globes are supporting each other because we fight the same fight and committed to keep doing that. And it's very important to maintain our intersectionality approach, so we cannot talking about democracy without talking about other movements. And with that, I would like to end the sessions.